with Death Battle doing the newest episode on this, I thought I'd review it and, well, give my thoughts on the topic as a whole. As well, I may or may not disagree with Death Battle's outcome. I don't know if I necessarily have the problem with anything they specifically say in the episode itself, and more so of how they scale both characters, which wouldn't be so much as criticizing what they say in the episode directly, like I did with the Ghost Rider vs. Spawn video, and more just giving my thoughts on their scaling. And so, I might as well do that. And in today's video, we'll be covering just that, Miles vs. Deku, who wins. And fortunately, I do have a friend with us who will be scaring our friend Deku for us. So please give a warm welcome to the King of the Monsters.
Don't worry, little Deku. We get enough poor matchups to last you your entire life. Wiz, bring out the street tears. The boy's hungry.
Thanks, Viper, for having me on. So, Deku gets a lot of recognition for his strength, being pit up against incredibly powerful characters like the S-class heroes or even Godzilla. I wonder who'd do something like that. So, how strong is this damn nerd? Due to inheriting All Might's power at his peaks, he should just be comparable to All Might. In fact, eventually becomes a little bit stronger. With the last embers of One For All, Deku generated an insane amount of wind pressure that affected the entire planet for a couple of days. This calcs pretty consistently into the continental or even multi-continental ranges and pretty high into it, which would also be pretty consistent with feats such as the at least continental level explosions used by Stars and Stripes to almost destroy Shigaraki, but not quite. This is after someone almost All Might level was beating on him for a pretty good while. Deku and Bakugo, in an earlier, weaker state, generated a large country to continental punch pretty easily, even after being severely wounded beforehand. Shigaraki was going to sink the entirety of Japan if he wasn't stopped. And it gets even worse when you consider this is probably weaker than, weakened All Might, considering it was literally the last embers of One For All. And All Might stated the difference between his prime and his weakened self, who was using embers, was over 60 times. So Deku being anywhere from punching away countries to devastating the planet with a couple blows seems about right. But what about speed? The little shit comfortably scales above people who are dodging lasers, catching them, reacting to light beams, etc. With calcs for low tiers being in the sub-relativistic ranges and high tiers being at least relativistic, if not faster than light. Deku specifically is just stated to be impossibly fast, with relativity being the reference, meaning that in its own weird way, Deku is being confirmed above light speed. Some people like to stack a lot of multipliers onto the light dodging feats. Personally, I don't think that's really viable, considering high tiers are still kind of pressed by light, right? Like if Season 1 Mina is casually light speed, why is Stars and Stripes needing to, hold lasers with her quirk instead of just, flick them away? But Deku can amplify his kinetic force with stuff like Fajin, increasing his power and speed, and also use gears to both increase his own speed and slow down the opponent. My hero also has weird soul hacks to a small extent, though using up the previous quirk user's souls weakens him, obviously. Deku is also pretty smart, typically going for weaknesses and studying powers both mid-fight and in advance. Wouldn't really help for a death battle since, well, no one really gets knowledge beforehand. Everyone else comments that he's smart like multiple times and he's really gifted. He does have some combat experience too, whereas All Might tended to just hit people really hard. Deku does implement skill to at least a minor extent, mostly because this idiot kept breaking his arms, so eventually he realized he had legs. He has a few items that make the strain of his powers a bit lesser, and he can deal with an incredible amount of pain, like literally breaking his arms every time he used One For All. and in the final battle, continuing to fight even when ligaments were being ripped out, his muscles were shredded, and he was running out of oxygen. When he was in his edgelord phase, he continued to fight villains without eating or sleeping for probably weeks at that point. And yeah, that's really about it. I mean, if you want to be really edgy, you could probably bring up that there's some implication that they can twist fate a little bit, as shown when Deku was literally fated to die. Same with All Might, and they just said no, and they didn't die. So, anyway, back to Snake Boy.
Thank you, King of the Monsters, for giving your input on scaling Deku. I know how much he loves the character, so I might as well just had him take it away.
What I said was true, from a certain point of view. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard!
But when it comes to Miles' stats, there's no need to go in the lower tier feats and scaling, and we can just go right into the higher end scaling and equipment and to an end, as well as explaining any misconceptions people have with the character, as there are some things we need to properly address. It's shown pretty consistently Miles does have some higher feats than some of the higher tier characters, such as harming the avatar of Null, the god killing birds that he fights, as well as the gods and avatars of Ares, who he also harms as well. And even these gods kind of crashing out of how over this mortal is able to beat their ass. Once again, these heralds of Ares could give Ares a Thor level character to a degree. And even Miles at points can beat up Fing Fang Foom, an Avengers tier character who can beat them up as a group, and sometimes even just come out on top when he fights the group as a whole. Even Blackheart, who does the same thing and is a consistent Ghost Rider level threat who boxes with the character. And it is never really stated that this guy has a weakness to Miles' powers or anything, even if Miles physically harms him even without using his powers. So it's kind of a moot point more than anything. And even Extremist Carnage, who was dogging on a current Iron Man. So it's not really inconsistent to scale him to these Avengers characters. And even characters like Peter Parker and Black Panther, who he can directly fight, have similar feats on a multitude of occasions, either it be harming Hulk, Firestorm, whoever is the OP character of the week they're fighting. So it's quite consistent for Miles. Spider-Man, especially with him rocking his new Vibranium suit, Vibranium also being able to take hits from these god tier characters and such, adding just even more consistency to this line of scaling for the character. But before we can actually scale Miles, I just want to get some misconceptions out of the way and go over some counter arguments. This line of scaling is an outlier and not consistent. Obviously, as we've proven, it is consistent, and I've pretty sure there's a multitude of examples I actually could have left out for this, especially when it comes to Peter Parker and scaling Miles to him. And as an outlier, something that happens very rarely and situationally, with Miles is doing this consistent feats against these characters and scales to other quote-unquote street tiers that do the same thing, it would be quite hard to argue this is inconsistent or not in character for him to do, especially when we know for a fact, A, Miles holds back very often, and only really started to not hold back in his most recent run, the same run where he's fighting all these gods in the first place, and B, he's constantly growing in power and is currently at his peak, so using anti-feats from years ago isn't really applicable, and C, his new Vibranium armor, which makes him more durable. He's lost to weaker characters. Obviously, yes, no one's saying he's on the same level or even as the same tier as these higher tier characters, but it doesn't mean he can't harm them or affect them in any way. Does Miles scale to any of Hulk's higher tier feats? No. Is it fair to scale Miles to a casual showing from a much weaker version of the Hulk, for example? Sure. No real problem with that, since it would be unquantifiably weaker to be fair, and keep in mind, Marvel characters consistently get much stronger, especially like the higher tier characters, over time, like hundreds, thousands, if not just infinitely, immeasurably, transcendent times stronger than their past selves. So it would be quite disingenuous to argue that Miles doesn't scale to even at least some of the past feats of these characters. I've also heard people just say chain scaling is bad, which it isn't actually. Chain scaling is the idea of scaling one character to another, and to another, do this thing, yada yada. Except it's actually quite a logical argument. Obviously, it gets to a degree, but like saying Miles scales to Peter or scales to Hulk or whatever the hell is not on its own that really bad of a line of reasoning. And this is due to something called syllogism, being a form of logical reasoning where a major claim is made and then a minor claim that connects to the major claim is made, and a concluding statement that is made that connects all three of the points together. It's pretty much A equals B equals C, so therefore A equals C. The most common example is all men are mortal, Socrates is a man, so therefore Socrates is mortal. But for an example, here's a analogy you guys might understand a little more. Godzilla scales to Ghidorah. Ghidorah has statements of destroying the planet. Therefore, Godzilla can also destroy the planet, or has comparable AP to such. It's basic line of reasoning. It's not really that hard to understand, and considering there's a whole logical reasoning behind this that's like straight up in philosophy, then that would kind of prove chain scaling isn't really that bad, at least to a degree. Then why can't we use it, especially if it's consistent? I understand if it's like for Hawkeye or something, but with the Spider-Man, they've been around for so long and been doing these feats for so long and surpassed themselves from so long ago that they don't really have these weaker stuff. Like, if we want to go by characters that I think would actually be defined as street tiers, we'd have Hawkeye, Black Widow, Daredevil. At this point, I would argue characters like Wolverine, Spider-Man, Miles Morales, even Batman, to get an analogy from DC, aren't really street tiers, honestly. They're like kind of getting into those mid tier levels of power with how much feats they have, actually. But obviously, Miles isn't fully scaled to them, and so for this case, I'll be limiting them to lower end feats, and not like to the Marvel cosmology or anything. Things quantifiable and such we can grab calcs from. Well, obviously, if you want to scale characters like Thor, Hulk, or whatever to the cosmology with numerous statements and showings of such, and if you want to scale Miles to it, I'm not going to stop you, especially if people are arguing Deku is 5D for some reason or whatever, then go off, I guess. But let's stick to where Deku actually scales and try to get a consistent line of scaling for Miles. And since we have to just prove Miles is above multi-continental, which was where Deku caps at, let's do that real quick. A good feat for this would be in the 1988 run, Grey Hulk, a much weaker version of Hulk than what Miles should scale to, is shown destroying this massive asteroid that dwarfs the planet, requiring planetary amounts of energy. As we said before, Peter Parker Spider-Man has statements against the later on Hulk and can harm him and can fight him. And Miles can also harm beings that can harm Thor, who can fight with the Hulk. Pretty simple. Even Drax the Destroyer in the past, who is actually a lot different from his MCU counterpart, is just flat out a consistent planet buster to even a large planetary level degree with how hard he's destroying these planets. And once again, this is a very early version of Drax, who a very early version of Thor and Hulk can scale to. Yet massively stronger versions are somewhat contested by some versions of Spider-Man. Obviously not saying Spider-Man would beat Drax, Thor, or Hulk, even these older versions. Just that he would get some of the casual features from these characters. Even old Thor himself just has a lot of planetary stuff, so at the least planetary is consistent. Hell, even in more recent runs, just the shockwaves are like destroying planets when he fights Gore and stuff. So yeah, that's really not something you can use against this character. Even the fact that like Johnny Flames, a much lower character in like terms of power, is compared to the heat of exploding stars, a already large planetary feat itself, is actually even more consistency that even like Miles should be in those large planetary degrees of power. And even with these calcs, it's not even that hard to get them higher. Not only like the movie Sentry in the comics had a lot of statements, having the power of 1,000,000 exploding suns, a solar to multi-solar feat. Once again, this character can fight characters like Hulk, and even Iron Man at points can harm him, so take that as you will. And this is consistently stated through the comics, so there's no reason not to believe this. And even Nova, a character that like base Carnage can fight and is massively below other characters like Hulk and Thor, so meaning that Miles would actually have a direct scaling chain to Nova, as Extremis Carnage, a much stronger version of Carnage, was getting contended by Miles, and a weaker version of Carnage can box with Nova and actually probably just beat, and is actually kind of winning in their fight, with Nova taking a solar system level explosion to the face and just kind of being fine. There's many more examples of this that I could go on, even just on the calc side of things, but I think this should be consistent enough to prove my point for the attack potency and durability that Miles is just significantly stronger. And same thing for speed, as it kind of just follows the same logic, which there would be tons of FTL to MFTL feats for the characters. And if you really are feeling in a little wankish mood, then go off with the fact that thoughts and light in Marvel can be argued infinite to immeasurable in the comics off of some statements, but take that as how you will. I wouldn't personally argue it, especially for Miles of all characters. But if you want to do that, then sure. Going by Miles' equipment and hacks, he does have a couple of things. Obviously his webs, his spider sense, but he actually has a lot more, including his invisibility and venom blast, which are shockingly versatile, beams, swords, so on. It's kind of crazy. And they're actually Duraneg as they attack and damage the nervous system directly. Combine that with vibranium mesh armor that helps him channel and power the energy, making it, and with it being an incredibly durable metal as well, making this fight kind of easily go in Miles' favor. He's much stronger, much faster, and has Dura negation too, unlike Deku's Dura negation with his soul stuff, kinda blowing his arms off. Yeah, if Deku could even land a hit for one. So in conclusion, I would say Miles kind of bodies Deku pretty badly. Even if we're just going by that planetary stuff, Deku is a multi-continental character really at best. And if you want to go by the small planetary stuff, even that's below the large planetary stuff or baseline planetary stuff that I've presented. And there's, trust me, many calcs I left out of this video just for the sake of time, because I don't want this to be like a 50-minute respect thread on like every single lower end feat in Marvel. So I just hope this kind of drags on the point of this character's scaling. So in conclusion, Miles should win pretty easily, all things considered. Please make sure to like, subscribe, and share this video. Peace.